Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Take Heart. One of the things that I think these days can be for us is an opportunity to practice the presence of God, learning to recognize Him in the everyday. When I first became a Christian, I used to treat meeting with God like a camel finding an oasis in the desert. You know, this was this once in a blue moon opportunity to fill up with God's presence, fill my hump, as it were, and then I'll be able to survive for the next little while. And I've been realizing over the years that actually He's made us for closeness as a regular thing. You know, He doesn't invite us to a relationship of intimacy, only to touch base with us every now and then. And so think of it less like a camel finding water in the desert and more like a goldfish swimming in water, the water being God's presence. And what the goldfish needs to do is not find water, but just recognize that the water is all around it. In the same way, when we think about God's presence, His presence is present in the everyday and in the ordinary. And for me, one of the things that I've been trying to grow in is learning to just recognize that. One of the lines that always struck me from the story of the prodigal son is when the father goes out to the older son, and the older son's really angry and stuff, and the father just says to him, almost in confusion, he's like, "My son, you're always with me. Everything I have is yours." And I've often wondered if the Father would say that kind of thing to me when I'm come to Him and I'm like, "God, I don't feel you, and it doesn't seem like you're anywhere near me," and stuff like that. He would just say that line to me, that same sentence, "Andy, you're always with me. Like, what are you talking about? Everything I have is yours." It's just learning to recognize me in the everyday. And one of the ways that there's kind of two, I suppose, facets of learning to recognize God's presence. The first I'm not really going to talk about, but what it is it's just withdrawing to a place of stillness and being alone with God, even if it's just for a couple of minutes a day. If we practice that, then what happens as we do that regularly is it begins to have a disproportionate impact on the rest of our day. Think of it like you got a glass of water and you just drop a couple of drops of cordial into it, and you can literally see these few drops of cordial just go through the whole glass of water and fill it with color and fill it with flavor. In the same way, just a few minutes alone in His presence, just opening ourselves up to Him, it can fill our day with flavor and with color. So that's one way we learn to practice His presence, withdrawing just to be with Him. But also, the other way is recognizing that most of our day is not going to be filled with silence and being still. It's going to be filled with activity. Obviously, for some of us at the moment, we're not able to work, and so maybe less activity than normal, but the busyness will return. And for lots of us, actually, we're even busier in lockdown than we were before. You know, we've got homeschooling, we're trying to juggle kids and everything like that. And I was really encouraged to discover this book a number of years ago that was recommended to me by Mike, called Practicing the Presence of God. And it's written by this guy called Brother Lorenz, who was a monk back in the day in the 16th century. And his book has become a kind of a spiritual classic. And the reason for that is because Brother Lorenz's story is that he wanted to go out from the monastery to go on mission and to tell people about Jesus, but he wasn't allowed to do that. And instead, his job that he was given was he was to be in the kitchen, and he spent his time mainly doing the washing up. And in that place of doing the washing up, he began to, quote unquote, practice the presence of God. And he discovered, and this is really the lesson of his life, he discovered that it's possible to meet with God anywhere. It's possible to meet with Him doing the most ordinary, mundane, and normal things. And so his kind of message to us would be, you can meet with God when you are changing a nappy. You can meet with God when you are cleaning the car. You can meet with God when you are filling a skip. That's what I've been doing the last couple of days. I've been doing some gardening. You can meet with God in that place. I remember thinking, okay, this is His message. He must have some pretty profound spiritual secrets. And so I read the book kind of on the lookout for, my antennae were up for these deep spiritual secrets that no one had ever discovered before. And what, to my surprise, I found is the book is actually just full of common sense spirituality, my favorite kind. And he just gives you a few tips. So one of them, he says, is if you want to meet with God in the everyday, one thing that's really helpful is just to talk to Him. just have a chat, have a chin wag, whatever you're doing, just natter away to God. Like if you were going for a drive with a friend, you would just chat away to them. He says do the same thing. So if you're doing the washing up, or if you are going for your daily exercise, just talk to him constantly. And it doesn't need to be profound, and it can be that, but it can just be about the weather or about how mundane life in lockdown is becoming. So it's just chat to him. Second tip that Brother Lorenz gives us is he says, just look at all the normal stuff you do in a day, like, having a shower, having breakfast, tidying up after breakfast, starting work, whatever it might be. Look at all the normal stuff you do in a day. And he says, just do those normal things. But this time, when you do them, try if you can to have an attitude in your heart and in your head that I'm going to do this for Jesus. I'm going to do this for him. And that piece of advice is really just taken straight from something Paul says, I think, in Colossians chapter 3. This is where Paul is talking to slaves, and he says to them, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Whatever you do, he says, do it as if you're doing it for Jesus. In the same way that we might cook a meal, for someone special that we love, obviously outside of current situation, we'd have them in the back of our minds as we prepared it, and we would try and put our heart and soul into making it as good as we could make it. Well, he's saying do that with everything as if we're doing it for Jesus. And then what it can become is not just, and I know this sounds a little bit nuts, but not just changing a nappy. I'm using that as an example because I have to change quite a few. But actually it can become worship when we're consciously doing it for him. And Brother Lorenz even says, he says, the more unpleasant the task, the less you actually want to do that task, the greater the opportunity to do it as an act of love for him. And his final little tip, which I found really helpful, was he says what to do basically when you forget. And what to do when it doesn't feel very spiritual, which is almost all of the time. I've tried in the last little while to cook a meal as if I'm cooking it for Jesus when I'm cooking it for my kids. And it kind of goes okay when I'm in the kitchen. Then when I put it all on the table, one of my boys just picks it up and drops it on the floor and then wants to eat whatever's on my plate, even though it's exactly the same food. It doesn't feel very spiritual in that moment, and often I will forget. Brother Lorenz basically just says, just don't worry about it. If you forget, just try again tomorrow. And what I found really freeing about that is that we don't become Brother Lorenz in 2 hours of trying to do this, but actually in a lifetime of habit, if we can get to a place where I'm just going to do the normal things that I have to fill this day with, but as much as possible, I'm going to do this as worship to you, Jesus. What we'll find is not that he comes closer, he's already close. It's that we become more aware of how close he is. Where can we practice his presence today?